What happens when the most feared crime lord in New Orleans walks into the restaurant where his new bookkeeper works, her third double shift of the week, and decides she's the perfect target for a lesson in humility? He expected her to fold. Instead, the 28-year-old accountant with the soft belly and the sharpest tongue in Louisiana made the untouchable Castellano kneel. The air inside Aubergine always carried the same smell on Friday nights: duck fat, aged bourbon, and money so old it had its own scent. Willa Soto had learned to identify the type of customer by their cologne before she even looked up from the reservation book. Cheap cologne meant a suburban couple celebrating something. Nothing meant a regular, and the specific combination of cedar, black pepper, and something colder, something that had no name and no warmth, meant trouble had just walked through the door. She didn't look up immediately. She never did. It was a strategy she had developed over 7 years of working on the periphery of places like this. Restaurants where the back booths were reserved not for celebrities, but for men who did not want to be photographed. Willa kept her eyes on the ledger open beneath the host stand, the numbers swimming in neat, honest columns. She was the bookkeeper for Aubergine, officially. On paper, she reconciled the restaurant's accounts, ensured the liquor licensing was filed on time, and managed the payroll for 43 employees. Unofficially, she knew better than to ask where certain deposits originated. Her manager, a thin, perpetually damp man named Roland Getz, materialized beside her so fast he nearly knocked the ledger off the stand. "He's early," Roland whispered, his voice carrying the particular pitch of a man who had rehearsed calm and failed completely. "He's never early. Table 9. Do not, Willa, look at me. Do not engage beyond what is necessary. Take the order, confirm the reservation, and disappear." Willa finally looked up. Across the candlelit dining room, a man settled into the corner booth with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a lifetime claiming space that did not technically belong to him. He moved like weather, like something that did not ask permission and did not need to. His name was Rafe Castellano. He was 41 years old, though he wore it the way certain men did. Not younger, not older, but timeless in the way that cold things were timeless. Black hair threaded with the barest silver at his temples, a jaw like architecture, dark eyes that swept the room not with curiosity, but with the quiet, methodical assessment of a man who counted exits the way other men counted blessings. He was flanked by 2 men who were large in the way. Furniture was large, present, immovable, and entirely decorative in comparison to their employer. Rafe Castellano was the undisputed head of the Castellano organization, a criminal empire built on shipping contracts, waterfront real estate, and the kind of violence that was always, plausibly, someone else's fault. His legitimate holdings employed 400 people. His less legitimate holdings employed considerably more. He was not a man who was arrested. He was not a man who was threatened. He was, by all available evidence, a man whom the city of New Orleans had collectively decided to work around, the way water worked around stone. Willa was aware of all of this. She had been aware of it since Roland hired her 18 months ago with 3 things: a competitive salary, a very specific NDA, and the particular look of a man who needed someone competent enough to keep the books clean and wise enough not to ask about the dirt. She closed the ledger. She picked up the leather folio with the evening's menu. She walked across the dining room. She was 28, stood 5'4", and carried her weight the way the earth carried mountains, without apology and without the slightest inclination to explain itself. Her thighs were heavy in her black slacks. Her blazer pulled slightly at the shoulders. She had spent the better part of her teenage years trying to take up less space, until she'd eventually understood that the space was not the problem. The men who resented her for occupying it were. "Good evening," Willa said, setting the menu on the table with a precision that was professional and nothing else. "Welcome back to Aubergine, Mr. Castellano," Can I get you started with something from the bar while you review the menu? Rafe Castellano did not look at the menu. He looked at her, not with the cursory, dismissive glance she had gotten from 10,000 men in 10,000 rooms. He looked at her the way you looked at something that did not fit where it had been placed. "You're not the usual host," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that never needed volume because it had never once in its life gone unheard. "I fill in on Fridays," Willa said evenly. "The usual host has a family commitment, and you don't? I have a ledger." The man on Rafe's left, the larger of the two, with a neck that suggested structural engineering, made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Rafe did not look away from Willa. "The Pellegrino," he said. "No ice. And tell the kitchen the salmon last week was overcooked." "I'll let Chef Broussard know," Willa said. "Though I'll point out that the kitchen log shows the salmon was prepared to your requested temperature. The note says medium, and medium it was." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Rafe tilted his head very slightly. "Are you correcting me?" "I'm providing documentation," Willa said pleasantly. "There's a difference. Would you like to hear the evening specials?" She described the specials. She did not rush. She did not stumble. When she was finished, she collected the menu folio and walked back toward the host's stand with the focused calm of a woman who was absolutely, categorically not thinking about the fact that her heart was going at a pace usually associated with cardiac events. Roland appeared at her elbow before she'd taken 4 steps. "What did you do?" he breathed. "Took his order. You corrected him. I cited the kitchen log, Willa." Roland's voice achieved a frequency she'd previously only heard from bats. He had a man fired from this restaurant 2 years ago because the man breathed too loudly near his booth. "That seems inefficient," Willa said. "The Pellegrino, no ice." She didn't feel the full weight of what she'd done until an hour later, when she went to clear the table after Rafe Castellano and his architectural bodyguards had gone. Under his empty water glass, precisely placed, was a folded square of paper. She opened it, in handwriting that was sharp and controlled, 4 words. "You have interesting instincts." Below it, a phone number. She folded the paper back up and put it in her blazer pocket and did not think about it for the rest of the evening. She thought about it for the entire drive home. The following 3 weeks were something she could not have named at the time, though later she would call it a reckoning. Rafe Castellano began appearing at Aubergine with a regularity that had no precedent. He came on Tuesdays, which he never had before. He came on the Fridays she covered the host stand. He always requested her section, a detail Roland conveyed to her with the expression of a man watching a natural disaster approach from a very beautiful distance. He did not harass her. That was the thing that confounded her most. Men like him, powerful, arrogant, accustomed to the particular obedience that money and violence produced. She had expected cruelty disguised as attention. She had her armor ready. He asked, occasionally, pointed questions that were dressed as small talk. What did she think of the new wine list? Whether she'd noticed the table by the window had a draft. Did she find the accounting software? Roland used adequate for a business of this volume. That last one made her set down the water pitcher and look at him directly. "No," she said. "It's 12 years old and it can't handle the reconciliation load properly. Whoever does your books is compensating manually, which adds roughly 4 hours per week of unnecessary labor." "I know," Rafe said. He was watching her the way he always did, with that flat, attentive, infuriating calm. "I was curious whether you knew." She picked the pitcher back up. "I'm going to need you to stop testing me. It's unsettling. Most people find it flattering." "Most people," Willa said, "probably have fewer accounting opinions." He smiled then. Not the practiced, social smile she'd seen him deploy with Roland and the other men he met with in the back booths. A different one, small, slightly involuntary there, and gone in under a second. She thought about that smile for 3 days. The reckoning broke open on a Thursday night she hadn't been scheduled to work. Roland had called her at 7 p.m., sounding like a man coming apart at the cellular level, asking if she could come in to handle an urgent payroll discrepancy. She'd come in. She'd found the discrepancy, a significant one. The kind that suggested someone's in payroll had been skimming in small, careful increments for the better part of 6 months. She'd been in the back office for 2 hours, methodically building the paper trail, when she heard the front door. She heard it because the restaurant was closed. The staff was gone, and no one should have had a key except Roland and the chef. Willa stayed very still. 3 men walked in. She heard their voices before she heard their words. The particular cadence of men who were not there for dinner and were not concerned with being quiet about it. Through the partially open office door, she could see the dining room. 2 of them were large and anonymous. The third one she recognized. His name was Cutter Fay. She'd seen him twice before, always at the bar, always nursing something dark and looking at the restaurant the way a man looked at something he was pricing. She'd flagged his presence to Roland after the second visit, and Roland had turned a color that was not found in nature. Cutter Fay ran collections for a faction that was actively, aggressively attempting to expand into Castellano territory, the waterfront, the restaurant supply chain, the very specific category of establishments like Aubergine, which existed in the long shadow of the Castellano organization and relied, in their quiet way, on that shadow for protection. 3 weeks late, Fay said to the empty dining room, in the tone of a man making an announcement. Getz knows what that means. Willa's hand closed around her phone. No signal. The building was old, and the walls were thick, and she already knew the back office was a dead zone. She'd complained to Roland about it at least 3 times. She thought very quickly. The office had 2 exits, the door into the dining room and the fire door that opened onto the alley. The alley meant getting out. Getting out meant Cutter Fay had free access to the restaurant, to the safe, to the ledger she'd left open on the desk that documented, in exhaustive detail, the accounting irregularities she'd just spent 2 hours excavating. That ledger could send someone to prison. It could also, depending on who found it first and what they chose to do with it, get someone killed. Willa closed the ledger. She locked it in the bottom drawer. She put the key in her blazer pocket, next to the folded piece of paper she had not been able to make herself throw away. Then she opened the office door and walked out into the dining room. "We're closed," she said. Cutter Fay turned. He looked at her with the specific variety of contempt men like him reserved for things they considered inconsequential. His eyes moved over her slowly, the heavy set of her shoulders, the wide curve of her hips, the blazer that pulled at the seams because she hadn't bought a new one since this job started, and she refused to on principle. "Well," he said, "look at this." "I heard that one already," Willa said. "You'll need to be more specific about who you're here to see. The restaurant is closed and the staff has gone home." Fay took a step toward her. The 2 men behind him shifted their weight in that preparatory way that she recognized from action movies and now, apparently, from her own life. "The safe," Fay said. "Back room. Open it." "I don't have access to the safe," Willa said. This was technically true. She had the combination written in a place Roland thought was clever and she thought was not, but the important thing was that she had not technically been given access. "You're the bookkeeper," Fay said. "Don't waste my time. I reconcile accounts," Willa said. "The safe is the manager's domain. If you'd like to call Roland Getz, I can give you his number." Fay's patience, what little of it existed, ran out. He moved fast for his size, crossing the distance between them and grabbing her by the arm, pulling her hard toward the back hallway. Willa's shoulder screamed with the force of it. She planted her heels into the hardwood floor and threw her weight backward with everything she had, which was not inconsiderable, and the sudden resistance threw Fay off enough that he stumbled. "Don't!" Willa said, her voice absolutely level. Touch me. Faye's face darkened. He raised his hand. The front door came off its frame. That was how it felt, anyway. The impact of it was so sudden and so complete that for a full second, Willa thought something had driven into the building from outside. Instead, it was Rafe Castellano. His coat was unbuttoned, and his expression was the most frightening thing she had ever seen on a human face. Not because it was angry, but because it wasn't. It was perfectly, cryogenically calm, and his eyes had found Faye's raised hand before he'd fully cleared the threshold. Behind him were 4 men, none of whom were the usual 2, which told Willa something had already happened tonight that had escalated this. Faye went white. Mr. Castellano, he started. Put your hand down, Rafe said. Faye put his hand down. The 2 men with Faye looked at each other with the expressions of people who were deeply reconsidering a series of decisions. Rafe walked into the dining room. He did not hurry. He stopped 12 feet from Faye, and his voice, when it came, had the quality of something read from a document. Precise, final, and not open to interpretation. I'm going to give you 30 seconds, Rafe said, to explain what you're doing in my restaurant with your hand raised at my accountant, and I want you to think very carefully, Cutter, about whether the explanation you have is one I'm going to find acceptable. Willa's breath caught on one word. My accountant. She filed it. She could be furious about the possessive later. Right now it had done something useful. Faye talked. He talked quickly and with the frantic, slightly unfocused energy of a man renegotiating on the fly. He talked about the territory, about Getz's late payment, about a misunderstanding, about how nobody had touched anybody, which was demonstrably false. But Willa understood why he was saying it. Rafe listened. He did not interrupt. When Faye finished, Rafe looked at the 2 men behind him. You're going to leave, he said. You're going to go back to whoever sent you and explain that Aubergine is under Castellano protection and has been for 4 years, and that if Cutter Faye ever walks through this door again, I will take it as a message that your employer has made a decision he is not prepared to back up. Are we clear? They were clear. They left. Faye left. The door, which was not completely off its frame but was not completely on it either, swung unevenly behind them. The dining room was quiet. One of the candles on the bar had guttered out, and the smoke from the wick drifted upward in a thin, meandering line. Rafe turned to look at her. He crossed the room slowly, with the deliberate care of a man who was managing something he hadn't expected to need to manage. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her arm, the one Faye had grabbed, and his jaw tightened with a controlled, private fury that she understood was not for her benefit but could not entirely contain itself. Let me see, he said. I'm fine. You're favoring it. I have a low pain threshold and a theatrical disposition, Willa said. I'm fine. Rafe looked at her for a long moment. His eyes moved over her face the way they moved over everything, carefully, registering more than they gave back. You didn't run, he said. The alley door was an option, she admitted. But I'd left the ledger on the desk. There's evidence in it. I couldn't let them find it. Rafe was quiet for a moment. You stayed to protect the books. I stayed to protect the evidence, she corrected. There's a difference. The same muscle moved in his jaw that she'd seen move the first time she'd corrected him, back when she'd cited the kitchen log over the salmon. But this time something else moved with it, something that wasn't irritation. You've been building a case, he said. It wasn't a question. Someone has been skimming from payroll for 6 months. Small amounts, careful, pattern. I only found it tonight. Tight. Show me. She looked at him. It's locked in the bottom drawer. I know. Show me, anyway. They sat in the back office for an hour. The candles in the dining room burned down one by one while Willa walked him through the ledger, the discrepancy, the pattern she'd identified. He listened the way he did everything, with absolute, unbroken attention. He asked 3 questions, all of them precise, none of them ones she hadn't already considered. When she finished, he sat back in Roland's chair, which he had occupied with the complete absence of self-consciousness of a man who considered chairs a general resource, and looked at her. "You're wasted on the host stand," he said. "I know," Willa said. "I told Roland that 6 months ago. He said the Fridays were only temporary." He lied. He needed coverage. "He took advantage," Rafe said, and there was something in the flatness of it that told her this was a distinction that mattered to him. Those aren't the same thing. Willa closed the ledger. She was tired in the way that had weight, the kind that settled in the shoulders and behind the eyes, after a day that had contained 3 times what a day was supposed to hold. Her arm ached where Faye had grabbed it. She was still, beneath the professional calm she'd maintained for the past 2 hours, slightly shaking. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Not tonight. In general. The Tuesdays. The Fridays," she paused. "The phone number." Rafe was quiet for long enough that she started to regret asking. "I needed someone who could handle the Vieux Carré portfolio," he said finally. "The accounting. It's been mismanaged for 3 years, and the firm I've been using is competent but not careful. There's a difference." He was using her words back at her. She noticed this. She did not say so. "That's a business reason," she said. "Yes. Is there another kind?" He looked at her, and the thing that had moved in his expression the night she'd cited the kitchen log, the thing she'd spent 3 days thinking about, was there again, more visible and less contained. "I've been in this business for 18 years, he said. "I have sat across from senators, federal judges, men who run organizations significantly more violent than mine. Not one of them has ever cited documentation at me." "It was relevant documentation. You corrected me on the salmon," Rafe said, "in front of 2 of my men, on your 2nd week of knowing who I am. Do you understand how many people in this city would not have done that?" "I understand," Willa said. "I also understand that being afraid of you doesn't change whether the salmon was medium." Rafe stood. He straightened his coat with the automatic, unhurried precision of a man who had never once in his life been visibly rattled. Except that she thought, with the careful observational equipment she'd been running since childhood, that he was something in the vicinity of rattled right now. Not afraid, not uncertain, but moved, somehow, off-center in a way that cost him. "I need a new accountant for the Vieux Carré portfolio," he said. "The position pays 3 times what Roland Getz pays you. The hours are your own. You will not be asked to do anything illegal, though you will be required to be discreet about what you do legally. And the Fridays," she said. He looked at her. "The Tuesdays," she said. "The phone number. Where does that go?" The silence in the office was complete. Through the wall, she could hear the last candle on the bar guttering. "That," Rafe said, "is a separate conversation." The next morning, a locksmith arrived at Aubergine to fix the front door. 2 hours after that, Roland Getz received a very polite, very final letter from Castellano Holdings, informing him that the management contract for Aubergine was being restructured. Roland called Willa 4 times. She did not answer until the 4th call, and when she did, she told him about the payroll skimming in enough detail that his end of the line went very, very quiet. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "The Fridays were supposed to be temporary." "I know," Willa said. "They weren't." She took the job. She took the 3 times salary and the flexible hours and the very clean, very modern accounting software that could handle the reconciliation load without anyone compensating manually. She moved her desk to the Castellano Holdings office in the quarter, a place that smelled of old wood and good coffee and money that was thoroughly, meticulously laundered through a diversified real estate portfolio. She did not see Rafe for the first 2 weeks. She saw his signature on documents. She saw the evidence of him everywhere, in the systematic, demanding precision with which the books had been kept, in the small, careful notes left in the margins of financial reports, in that sharp, controlled handwriting she recognized from the napkin she still had not thrown away. She read those margins the way some people read letters. He walked into the office on a Wednesday afternoon in October, without announcement, which she'd been warned he would do. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the desk and the 3 monitors and the color-coded filing system she'd established in 14 days. "The Bienville Street property," he said by way of greeting. "The escrow account. Walk me through what you found." She walked him through it. He stood behind her and read the screen over her shoulder, which she found intensely distracting and refused to show. He asked 4 questions. She answered all 4 without referring to the documents, because she had read them twice, and her memory for numbers was the closest thing to a superpower she'd ever had. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The analyst before you took 3 weeks to find that," he said. "The pattern is in the variance column," she said. "Most people go to the totals first. The variance is where the honest information lives. Why didn't you correct him on that?" "He wasn't my problem to correct. This job is." She paused. "You are." He was very still behind her. She could feel the warmth of him close enough that it registered. "I am," he agreed. She turned around in her chair. He was closer than she'd calculated. She hadn't heard him move, and for a moment the air in the office had the quality of the moment before weather changed. Something pressurized and waiting, the separate conversation, Willa said, about the Tuesdays. Rafe looked at her. He had the look of a man who had decided something and was now discovering what the decision felt like from the inside. "I saw you the first week Roland hired you," he said. "You were in the back booth running numbers on a napkin because your laptop had died, and you refused to stop working. You flagged an error in the wine inventory report that the vendor had been submitting for 8 months. I watched you do it. I watched you argue it with Roland until he believed you, and then I watched you go back to your numbers without waiting for a thank you." Willa said nothing. "I've been in this business for 18 years, he said again, and this time the repetition had a different weight. "I have not met a person in that time, not one, who was not eventually moved by fear or money or ambition, who was not, in some way I could identify and therefore account for, purchasable." He paused. "You corrected me about a piece of fish in front of my men, and then asked if I wanted to hear the specials." "You did want to hear the specials?" "I wanted," Rafe said, with a precision that left no room for misinterpretation, "to know what you would do next." The office was quiet. Outside, the quarter was doing what it always did, living out loud indifferent to interior climates. "That's not an explanation," Willa said. "For the phone number?" "No," Rafe said. "It's not." He crossed the office. He stopped in front of her chair, and she tipped her chin up, the way she had tipped it up in the dining room of Aubergine, when a man had put a gun on the table, and she had decided that backing down was a form of poverty she could not afford. "I am not a good man," Rafe said. This did not sound like a confession. It sounded like an inventory. "I am careful and I am effective, and I protect what is mine with a consistency that most institutions would envy. I do not apologize for what I am. I do not explain it." "I know," Willa said. "I am telling you now," he said, "because you're different, because you are the only person in my vicinity, possibly in this entire city, who doesn't already have a theory about what I want and isn't trying to position themselves for it. You argue with me about salmon, and you cite documents, and you stayed in a room with 3 dangerous men to protect a ledger. The evidence in that ledger—" "I know why you did it," Rafe said. "I'm telling you what it looked like from where I was standing." He paused. It looked like someone who understood that some things were worth more than being safe. Willa looked up at him. The cost of maintaining eye contact with Rafe Castellano was significant, and she paid it anyway. "You still haven't explained the phone number," she said. "No," he said. "I haven't." He reached into his jacket and produced a small, flat case. He set it on the desk in front of her. She opened it. Inside was a key. "The Prytania Street house," he said. "It's in the portfolio. It's been empty for 2 years. I bought it as an investment and then found I didn't want to sell it." He paused. It has a good desk. Willa looked at the key. She looked at him. She thought about a phone number she hadn't thrown away, and a napkin she'd cited in an argument, and 3 weeks of Tuesday evenings that had quietly rearranged something she hadn't known needed rearranging. This is a very complicated way to ask a person to dinner, she said. Something moved across his face. The real smile, the small involuntary one, more sustained this time. I don't do simple, he said. I noticed, Willa said. She picked up the key. The Bienville Street escrow needs to be restructured before the end of the quarter. I'm going to need 2 weeks and unfettered access to the full transaction history. You'll have it. And the accounting software for the Esplanade properties is worse than what Roland used. I want to replace it. Done! And, Willa said, turning the key over in her palm, feeling the particular weight of a thing that opens something, I don't do fish. Rafe looked at her. I'll tell the kitchen. Tell them yourself, she said. You're very good at it. She stood up. She was close enough that she had to tip her chin up to hold his gaze, and she did it the way she'd done everything. Without apology, without retreat, with the specific and unshakable confidence of a woman who had spent years learning that her size was not a diminishment, but a foundation. Something to plant your feet on when the room decided to be dangerous. Rafe reached out. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, with a care that was startlingly at odds with the controlled precision of everything else he did. Like watching a man who built walls discover he'd left a door open and was not, in fact, interested in closing it. You should know, he said quietly, that I am not accustomed to people telling me what to do. I know, Willa said. You should know that I'm not accustomed to people worth listening to. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, We're going to be a problem. We already are, Willa said. I have 3 months of your Vieux Carré financials that say so. He laughed. It was brief and genuine, and it changed the entire architecture of his face, moved something permanent, rearranged it in a way she suspected was not reversible. She thought, good. She pocketed the key and picked up the Bienville Street file and got back to work. And Rafe Castellano, undisputed head of the Castellano organization, controller of the waterfront, the man whom the city of New Orleans had long since decided to work around, and stood in her office doorway for a moment longer than was necessary. Then he said, Dinner. Friday. I work Fridays, she said without looking up. Not anymore, he said. She looked up then. His expression had settled back into the flat, unreadable patience she knew now was not coldness but containment, the face of a man who had decided something and was at peace with the cost. Fine, Willa said. Friday, but I'm not correcting the waiter. No, Rafe said, straightening his coat. That's my job.